This is Module 34, Thinking, Concepts, and Creativity. Okay, so let's talk about concepts. So first of all, let's back up and talk about cognition. I've talked about cognition before in class, but cognition, when we refer to cognition, it's all of the mental activities that are associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. Basically, if it's taking place up in your head, it's cognition. Now, cognitive psychologists are individuals who study all of these processes associated with things taking place in your brain. Now, one activity that is part of cognition is concept formation. What is a concept? Well, a concept is a mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, or people. So, for example, when we think of a chair, we might think of a desk chair. We might think of a school chair. We might think of a high chair. There are lots of things that go into that concept of chair. And the reason why we have concepts is because it really simplifies the world for us. It allows us to easily recognize things so we can respond to them appropriately. If we didn't have concepts, every single thing would be kind of unique. And that would be a lot harder for our brain to manage. Now, a lot of the times when we have a concept, it's kind of organized around what we call a prototype, which is a mental image or your best example of that category. So, for example, if I tell you to think of a dog, my prototype of a dog is a German Shepherd. That's the first kind of animal, or that's the image that comes to mind when I think of a dog. And so that would be my prototype. Now, for a bird, if I asked you what's more of a bird, people are quicker to recognize a crow as a bird than a penguin as a bird, because a crow is usually closer in similarity to the prototype for bird versus a penguin. Now, interestingly, when we categorize people, we usually shift them toward our category prototypes. So, for example, they did this study where they had people look at faces generated through software that mix the amount of percentages of typically male and typically female features. So people would see faces of typically 70% male features. And what's interesting, though, is they said that that was representative of their prototype. Later, though, they actually chose, when they were asked to recall the face that they had chosen, they actually chose faces that were even more male typical. So it shows that we kind of veer even more closer to the stereotype or the prototype than it actually is. Also, when things don't match our prototypes neatly, it takes us longer to recognize and categorize that thing or behavior. So, for example, people are more likely to recognize discrimination when it's taking place between a male to a female versus a female to a female. It doesn't fit our prototype necessarily of discrimination when it occurs between the sexes or within the sexes. And so it takes people longer to categorize. Also, if you are suffering from an illness and your symptoms aren't matching your prototype of that illness, let's say a heart attack, if you're not having sharp stabbing pains in your chest, but you're having other symptoms and those symptoms aren't matching your prototype, you might not recognize that you're having a heart attack. So sometimes our brains aren't super good at recognizing things that don't neatly fit our prototypes. And then we have thinking creatively. So what is creativity? It's the ability to produce new and valuable ideas. Now, in order to be creative, you have to have some level of intelligence. You have to have some aptitude or ability to learn. But brain activity associated with intelligence actually differs from that associated with creativity. Just because someone has super high intelligence does not mean they are super creative. And the reason for that is a lot of times intelligence tests or aptitude tests, like the SAT, for example, measures what we call convergent thinking. Convergent thinking is the ability to come to the one right answer. And creativity asks you to do the opposite. Creativity asks you to have divergent thinking. So, divergent thinking is when you have the ability to think of many different options, many things that could be correct, and think in new ways. So, you're diverging from just one. Now, Sternberg, this guy, Robert Sternberg, he had this theory called the creativity theory. And he said that creativity has 5 parts. You have to have expertise, first of all, meaning you have to know enough about the thing that you're doing in order to think novel things about it. You have to have imaginative thinking skills. So you have to be able to think beyond what's right in front of you. You have to have a venturesome personality, meaning you have to be one that's willing to kind of go on the journey of finding some new ideas and stick with it. You have to have intrinsic motivation, meaning you have to do it because you enjoy it and you will like it and you just want to do it for your own sake. And it's best if you're in a creative environment. We find that people who create creative ideas typically have some kind of mentor, or they're mentoring someone else. They have colleagues and an environment that fosters creativity. And that's it. Test yourself, and I'll see you soon.